On August 25, 79 AD, at 7 a.m., a superheated pyroclastic surge slammed into Pompeii, a wave of gas and ash hotter than 205 at a Greek, boiling brains in an instant. But forensic scans of the plaster casts tell a more disturbing story. Some tried to run, others shielded their children. How did they really die? Through thermal imaging, bone analysis, and 3D simulations, we piece together the deadly physics of Vesuvius's final strike. But to understand that final moment, we must go back to the city that was, a city of life and noise, of ambition and routine, unknowingly counting down its last hours. In the early morning light of August 24, 79 AD, Pompeii stirred awake just as it had for centuries. The sun rose over the fertile slopes of Mount Vesuvius, casting long shadows across a bustling Roman city of some 20,000 souls. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread from corner bakeries, the tang of the sea from the nearby Bay of Naples, and the ever-present murmur of commerce from the Forum. Already, the streets were alive. A mosaicist carefully set tesserae into a new floor, a fishmonger arranged his catch on marble slabs, and schoolchildren recited the day's lessons under the shade of a colonnade, their voices competing with the cries of vendors. Potters, weavers, and merchants were already setting out their wares, while slaves hurried through the narrow streets, carrying amphorae of wine or baskets of produce from the surrounding villas. The public fountains, fed by the aqueduct, gurgled as women filled their water jugs, exchanging gossip. It was a city at the peak of its prosperity, a provincial jewel where the wealthy built elegant homes with frescoed walls and elaborate gardens, and the poor crowded into cramped insulae rising 3 or 4 stories high. In the Palestra, gladiators trained under the gaze of their lanista, their grunts echoing off the stone walls. In the basilica, politicians and merchants debated contracts and lawsuits, and on a stuccoed wall near the Stavian Gate, a newly painted election slogan urged passers-by to vote for Lucius Papitius Secundus, a young man from a prominent family. Pompeii seemed eternal. Yet this bustling city was not just a backwater, it was a vital cog in the Roman imperial machine. Campania, with its rich volcanic soil, was one of the empire's breadbaskets, producing grain, olives, and especially wine that was exported across the Mediterranean. The local vineyards, planted on the slopes of Vesuvius itself, yielded grapes with a distinctive flavor, and Pompeian wine was known as far north as Gaul and as far south as Egypt. The city's port, though modest, bustled with ships unloading goods from Alexandria, Carthage, and Massilia. Spices, silks, papyrus, and slaves all passed through its docks. The local elite, families like the Holconi and the Caecili, competed fiercely for political office, spending vast sums on public entertainments and monuments to win the favor of the citizens. Marcus Holconius Rufus, a prominent magistrate and priest of Augustus, had recently funded the restoration of the large theater, and his statue stood proudly in the Forum. The Caecili owned the Grand House of the Faun, one of the largest private residences in the city, its floors covered with intricate mosaics depicting the Battle of Issus. In the months before the eruption, a municipal election had just concluded, and the walls were still covered with painted slogans. If upright living is thought to be any recommendation, Lucretius Fronto is worthy of office, and the bakers asked for Gaius Julius Polybius for Doomber. The city was politically vibrant, deeply connected to Rome, and utterly unaware that the mountain which provided its prosperity was also its doom. The strategic importance of the region meant that it was dotted with luxurious villas owned by senators and emperors, who came to enjoy the coastal beauty and the healing springs. Had the warning signs been understood, the political will to evacuate would have been immense, but the Romans, for all their engineering genius, knew nothing of volcanology. They worshipped the gods of fire and forged Vulcan, the divine smith, but they could not read the earth's deep rumblings. Instead, they interpreted tremors as the work of mythical giants or as omens to be expiated by sacrifice. As the sun climbed higher that morning, the priests in the temple of Jupiter prepared the daily offerings, their minds on ritual, not on the invisible magma chambers swelling miles beneath their feet. Yet beneath its vibrant surface, Pompeii was a city built on borrowed time. The Campania region had always been prone to earthquakes. A massive one in 62 AD had toppled buildings and left deep scars, and for years the city had been slowly rebuilding. Tremors were so common that most residents barely registered them anymore, a slight shudder in the ground, a rattle of a chandelier. The rebuilding was a testament to Roman resilience. Masons and architects had flocked to Pompeii, reinforcing walls with brick-faced concrete and repairing the aqueducts. The house of the Vetii, owned by 2 freedman brothers, had just been redecorated with new frescoes of mythological scenes, their vibrant colors still fresh. The Stavian baths, the city's oldest public baths, had been upgraded with new hypocaust systems. But this very reconstruction masked a profound misunderstanding. In the days leading up to the eruption, there had been small quakes, a nervous fidgeting of the earth, But nobody imagined the true cause. Even the local priests who interpreted omens saw only mundane portents: a fall of blood from a statue, a strange ooze seeping from the ground, and prescribed the usual rites. The mountain that loomed over the city with its green slopes and wild vineyards was not even recognized as a volcano. Vesuvius had been dormant for centuries. Its last major eruption was a distant memory, lost to legend. So when the first sign of catastrophe came, it was almost entirely misinterpreted. The morning of August 24 began with oppressive heat. The sky was a deep, cloudless blue, and the sun beat down on the red-tiled roofs. By midday, people were seeking shade, retreating to the cool interiors of their homes or the public baths. The city's daily rhythm was in full swing. Bakers kneaded dough, adding ground chestnuts or poppy seeds for flavor. Fullers trampled cloth in vats of human urine, used to cleanse wool. Schoolchildren wrote their lessons on wax tablets, scratching with a stylus while their tutor dozed in the heat. In the forum, money changers stacked coins on their tables, arguing over exchange rates with Greek merchants. At the amphitheater, a worker sprinkled water on the sand to keep the dust down for the afternoon's games. Then, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the mountain spoke. It began with a deep, ominous rumbling louder than any thunder. The ground shook violently, and then Vesuvius split open. A colossal column of gas, ash, and rock exploded from the crater, punching through the atmosphere like a gigantic fist. It rose with terrifying speed, higher and higher, until it towered more than 20 miles into the stratosphere, spreading out at the top into the shape of an umbrella pine. This is what the 17-year-old Pliny the Younger would later record in his famous letter from Misenum: across the bay, a cloud like a tree, its trunk rising and then flattening into branches. He could not yet know that this was a Plinian eruption, the very type that would one day bear his family name. But even as he watched, his uncle, Pliny the Elder, was already making a fateful decision. As commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, Pliny the Elder was not just a naturalist, but a seasoned military leader, a man of action and insatiable curiosity. He had spent a lifetime cataloging the natural world, writing his vast natural history, but his true passion was understanding the forces that shaped the earth. When he saw the cloud, his first instinct was scholarly. He ordered a fast warship, a Liburnian galley, to be prepared, intending to sail closer for observation. He called for his wax tablets and his secretary, determining that this phenomenon must be recorded in detail. But as he was leaving his villa, a breathless messenger arrived from Rectina, a friend of his, living at the foot of the mountain, pleading for rescue. Rectina's villa lay directly in the path of the falling pumice, and her only escape was by sea. In that moment, duty and curiosity fused into a single, lethal resolve. Pliny the Elder changed his plan from observation to a full-scale rescue mission. He ordered the fleet to prepare, not just the single Liburnian, but the quadriremes and triremes, any vessel that could carry refugees. He addressed his captains, his voice steady: "Fortune favors the brave. We shall sail toward the danger, not away." It was a choice that would embody the Roman ideal of virtus, courage in the face of calamity. He would sail directly into the cataclysm, driven by both scientific inquiry and a commander's responsibility. It was a decision that would make his name immortal and cost him his life. The people of Pompeii stared up in shock and disbelief. The column seemed to consume the sky, turning day into an eerie twilight. What? Lightning flickered within the roiling cloud, born of static electricity from the grinding ash particles, and the earth continued to convulse. Then it began to rain, not water, but pumice. Small, light, porous stones began to flutter down like a deadly snow, slowly at first, then more heavily. These were fragments of frothy magma, cooled and hardened, ranging in size from tiny pellets to chunks as large as fists. They clattered onto rooftops, into streets, bouncing off the heads and shoulders of those caught outside. People screamed, ran, or stood frozen. In the forum, a potter who had been selling his wares shielded his head with a tray of unfired clay bowls. In a bakery, a slave bolted the door and huddled with the master's family, the oven still roaring. What was happening? Was the mountain angry? Was it the end of the world? The wealthier citizens, with horse-drawn carriages or access to boats, had a fleeting chance, but for the urban poor, escape was a desperate gamble. The narrow streets, never designed for mass evacuation, became traps. Carts overturned, donkeys brayed, and the crush of bodies created a chaos that no authority could manage. But dead of fast in 20 times. The city's magistrates, the duoviri, would have tried to organize relief, sending runners to order the gates opened, but the sheer speed of the disaster overwhelmed any civic plan. We can imagine them shouting orders that were swallowed by the din, their authority evaporating as quickly as the sun's light. The initial hours were chaotic. A city plunged into panic and confusion. Some immediately grabbed their most precious belongings, jewelry, coins, family heirlooms, and fled toward the city gates, hoping to escape the falling stones. The The roads became jammed with carts, animals, and desperate crowds. Others, perhaps the elderly, the sick, or those too frightened to move, stayed indoors, praying to the gods. In the house of the tragic poet, a wealthy resident hastily gathered his silverware while his wife clutched the children, their eyes wide with terror. A fuller named Stephanus, known from election graffiti, may have tried to rally his workers, his voice drowned out by the noise. The wealthy sent slaves to gather their valuables, while the poor simply tried to find any shelter they could. In a small tin-smithing workshop, an artisan buried his precious tools under the floor. In a tavern, the owner poured out the last amphora of wine for his patrons, a final act of hospitality. A mother clutched her baby. A young man helped his elderly father stumble through the darkening streets. A mosaicist abandoned a half-finished panel of a hunting dog, the tesserae still scattered. In the gladiatorial barracks, where iron-shackled prisoners trained for death, the fighters may have seen this as their chance to flee, or perhaps they stayed to protect their trainers and families, their weapons useless against the sky. Pumice continued to fall, piling up inch by inch, then foot by foot. The weight of the accumulation was a relentless, crushing force. Roman roofs, built with heavy terracotta tiles on wooden beams, were not designed to bear such loads. By evening, it had accumulated to a depth of several feet, and the roofs of Pompeii began to groan under the weight. Wooden beams snapped with the crack of breaking bone, terracotta tiles shattered like eggshells, and entire upper stories collapsed, crushing those who had sought refuge within. The sounds of destruction mixed with human screams to create a cacophony that must have seemed like the world's end. As night fell, the situation turned dire. The world became an impenetrable blackness, lit only by intermittent flashes of volcanic lightning and distant fires. The air grew thick with choking ash and sulfurous fumes, making every breath a struggle. People tied cloths over their mouths, but it did little to filter the fine, abrasive dust that coated their tongues and burned their eyes. The continuous shaking of the earth made standing impossible, and many crawled on hands and knees through the deepening layers of debris, their palms bleeding from the sharp pumice. At the nearby port, ships rocked violently, and Pliny the Younger, in his letters, describes the terror of the scene, the sea retreating, animals acting strangely, the very landscape transformed into a hellscape. Over in Misnum, his uncle, Pliny the Elder, had set out with his fleet. The journey across the bay was a nightmare of floating pumice and boiling water, but Pliny the Elder, ever the commander, dictated observations to his secretary while encouraging his frightened crew. "What is this," he wrote, "but the vomit of Vulcan's forge? What is this forging in?" They could not land at Pompeii. The shoreline was blocked by a floating barricade of pumice, so they diverted to Stabiae further south, where they went ashore to rescue terrified inhabitants. There, Pliny the Elder, corpulent and asthmatic, was greeted by Pomponianus, a friend who had loaded his belongings onto a ship but could not sail because the wind was against him. Pliny embraced him, called for a bath, and then dined, feigning calm to reassure the panicked citizens. He spoke cheerfully of the eruption, declaring it magnificent, and promised a swift rescue as soon as the wind changed. But the air was thick with poison, and his body, already weakened, began to fail. By morning, he was found dead, his slaves having abandoned him in the chaos, a victim of the same volcanic fumes that would soon snuff out thousands of lives. His decision to sail into the eruption saved many who could not outrun the surge, but it was a sacrifice that epitomizes the clash between human curiosity and nature's indifferent power. Back in Pompeii, the night stretched on endlessly. People huddled in groups, in doorways, in underground cellars, in the upper rooms that still stood, listening to the relentless drumming of pumice and the screams of those trapped and dying. What would you have done in that suffocating darkness? Would you have run for the gates, risking the collapsing buildings and the hail of stones, or would you have stayed with your family, waiting for a dawn that might never come? The psychological torment must have been unbearable, the uncertainty, the terror, the slow realization that the world as they knew it was ending. Some chose to end their own lives rather than face the unknown. In one house, a man fell on his sword, his body later found next to his wife's. Others desperately tried to dig their loved ones out of the rubble, their fingers bloodied. A few, the very determined, perhaps did manage to escape the city limits, fleeing into the countryside under a sky that glowed an evil red. But for most, the city had become their tomb. The first wild creatures to sense the true danger were the animals. Dogs barked and howled, horses panicked and broke their tethers, birds fell from the sky, asphyxiated by the ash. But even these omens were powerless against the overwhelming force that was building deep within the volcano. Throughout the night, although the falling pumice began to ease in the pre-dawn hours, the column above Vesuvius was becoming unstable. The eruption was entering a new and far more deadly phase. tremendous weight of the suspended material could no longer be supported by the eruption column, and it began to collapse under its own mass. This collapse would generate the most lethal phenomenon of a volcanic eruption, the pyroclastic surge. At around 7 a.m. on the morning of August 25, the first of these surges descended upon Pompeii. It was a superheated avalanche of gas, ash, and volcanic fragments racing down the slopes of Vesuvius at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. It did not announce itself with a rumble. It was too fast, too silent in its approach. One moment there was the relative quiet of the stricken city. The next, a churning, incandescent cloud enveloped everything. The surge was hotter than 250 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, to ignite wood, to instantly boil the fluids inside a human body. Forensic studies of the victims' bones, using advanced thermal imaging and analysis, revealed a horrific reality. People were killed in a fraction of a second. Those lying down had their skulls burst open from the sudden vaporization of their brains. Those standing had their muscles contract so violently that their skeletons assumed pitiful, contorted postures. This, then, is the explanation for the haunting plaster cast that had become the iconic face of Pompeii's tragedy. When archaeologists later discovered the remains of buildings, they found curious cavities in the hardened ash. These were the voids where human bodies had once lain, the soft tissues long since decayed, but the hardened ash preserving a perfect mold of their final moment. In the 1860s, Giuseppe Fiorelli pioneered the technique of pouring liquid plaster into these cavities. When the plaster set and the surrounding ash was chipped away, what emerged was a precise, three-dimensional snapshot of a human being at the instant of death. The casts show people in every conceivable posture, curled in fetal protection, reaching for their throats in a vain struggle for one last breath. A mother shielding her child, a slave still clutching a sack of coins, a couple embracing in a final act of love. They are not mere skeletons, they are individuals, frozen in time, their terror and humanity captured for eternity. But how exactly did they die? Modern science allows us to piece together the deadly physics of that pyroclastic surge. The initial wave of extremely hot, low-density gas that preceded the denser flow would have subjected the victims to thermal shock. This shock is so intense that it causes instant muscular paralysis and death within a single inhalation. Breathing in air at over 200 degrees Celsius causes the respiratory tract to sear and the lungs to collapse. The vocal cords contract, preventing even a scream. The heat then penetrates the skull, and because the brain case is a sealed vessel, the rapid boiling of brain tissue generates enough pressure to literally blow the skull apart. Forensic pathologists examining the cast have noted the telltale cracks radiating from the crania. For those who managed to hold their breath or were partially sheltered, death may have come a few seconds later from asphyxiation as the fine ash filled their lungs, but it was still blindingly fast. The 3D simulations we can create today illustrate the flow dynamics. The surge swept around corners and over obstacles, filling every space, leaving no hiding place. Even those who had fled into the deepest cellars were not safe. The hot gases seeped in like an invisible predator. But consider this, in the very moment that surge hit, did any of them have a single second of realization, a flash of regret or love? The micro-question hangs in the air. What was the last thought that raced through their minds as the heat closed in? Pompeii was not the only victim. The surge simultaneously devastated the neighboring city of Herculaneum, though in a slightly different manner. There, the heat was even more intense, instantly carbonizing wood and tissue, leaving behind only bones. But Pompeii's fate was sealed in ash and pumice, creating a time capsule of unmatched detail. After the surges, the eruption continued for hours, depositing thick layers of ash that buried the city under a blanket up to 20 feet deep. The landscape was utterly transformed. Farms, villas, and roads vanished. The coastline shifted, and the Sarno River was choked with debris. The survivors who had fled early were scattered across Campania, many losing everything. The immediate aftermath was a humanitarian crisis of staggering scale. Emperor Titus, who had just ascended to the throne 2 months earlier, responded with remarkable energy and compassion. He appointed 2 ex-consuls, Claudius Sacerdos and Marcus Marius, to organize relief efforts, granting them wide powers to requisition supplies and settle refugees. He visited the affected areas personally, walking through the ash-covered ruins, and opened his own purse to compensate the destitute, seizing the estates of those who died without heirs to fund the aid. His swift actions, recorded by the historian Suetonius, were an exercise of clementia, the paternal care that legitimized imperial rule, and they stood in stark contrast to the disengagement of earlier emperors like Nero. Yet, even Titus could not summon the dead. The commercial impact was severe. Pompeii and Herculaneum had been vital links in the trade network, and their destruction disrupted the flow of goods, particularly grain and wine, causing temporary shortages and price spikes in Rome itself. The fertile crescent of Campania, once a green jewel, was entombed under gray ash, In a grim irony, however, the volcanic soil would eventually prove even richer, and in time, new settlements rose nearby, but the cities themselves were never rebuilt. The mountain eventually fell silent, leaving a landscape transformed into a gray, alien desert. Precise date of August 25 for the final surge comes from both historical records and modern volcanological studies, matching the testimony of Pliny the Younger and the stratigraphic evidence. For centuries, Pompeii slept. The memory of the city faded into legend, only the name remained, a vague reference in ancient texts. The area was occasionally searched by grave robbers and treasure hunters who tunneled into the ruins to extract valuable statues and marble, but the true extent of the buried city was unknown. It was not until 1748, during the Bourbon monarchy of the Kingdom of Naples, that a systematic rediscovery began. King Charles III of Bourbon, a monarch fascinated by antiquity, ordered the exploration of the site after the earlier sensational finds at Herculaneum. His motivations were as much political as cultural. Unearthing ancient treasures would glorify his reign, elevate Naples as a center of Enlightenment learning, and link his dynasty to the grandeur of Rome. A Spanish military engineer, Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre, directed the first official excavations. His methods were crude by today's standards, more treasure hunting than archaeology, as they primarily sought artworks for the royal collection. He dug haphazard tunnels, often destroying stratigraphy, and filled in one hole to start another when finds were disappointing. But gradually, as they dug into the hillside, they uncovered a whole city, streets, shops, houses, and that most heart-rending of discoveries, the first human remains. The early excavators were baffled by the skeletons and the strange cavities they found. It was Fiorelli's insight in the 1860s that transformed our understanding. By pouring plaster into those voids, he literally resurrected the dead, giving them back their form and their final gestures. His technique has since been refined. Modern casts are sometimes made with resin or other materials, and CT scans allow us to see inside them without damage, but the emotional impact remains the same. To stand before one of these casts is to confront the fragility of life with an immediacy that no written record can convey. There is the cast of a sitting man, his hands covering his face in a gesture of despair, a dog contorted in a futile struggle against its chain, a small child lying on its back, its mouth open in a silent scream. These are not just archaeological artifacts, they are people, frozen at their most vulnerable, and they force us to ask profound questions about our own mortality and our relationship with nature's awesome power. The excavation of Pompeii has been a continuous, painstaking process for over 2.5 centuries, and it is far from complete. About a third of the city still lies buried. Each new dig reveals more treasures, vibrant frescoes that look as if they were painted yesterday, political slogans scrawled on walls, bakeries with loaves still in the ovens, a gladiatorial barracks with graffiti boasting of the fighters' conquests. There is a haunting normality to it all, a sense that the catastrophe interrupted life in the middle of 1,000 ordinary actions. A pot of paint was left open on a scaffolding, a meal of fish and bread was set out and never eaten, a jeweler's stock was abandoned in a hurry. The city provides the most complete picture we have of daily life in the Roman Empire, from the luxury of the ruling elite to the squalor of the enslaved. It is a democratic snapshot, where the voices of the voiceless, the slaves, the women, the poor, are preserved alongside those of the mighty. But what lessons does Pompeii's last day hold for us today? In an age where we still build cities near active volcanoes, Naples itself nestles at the foot of Vesuvius, home to 3 million people. The ancient tragedy is a stark warning. We know that Vesuvius will erupt again. It is a question of when, not if. The next eruption could be of similar scale, or even larger. The Italian government has an evacuation plan, but the logistical challenges of moving millions of people in an emergency are immense. Pompeii reminds us that nature's fury can be swift and merciless, that all our technology and preparedness can be rendered meaningless in the face of a superheated cloud moving at highway speeds. It is a tale not just of destruction, but of human resilience. The city was never rebuilt, but its memory endures, a testament to those who lived and died there. It is also a tale of scientific inquiry, from the ancient observations of Pliny the Younger to the modern 3D simulations that reveal the physics of death. Each generation uses the tools at its disposal to understand and perhaps to prepare. Pompeii's legacy extends far beyond volcanology. It has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers for centuries. The romantic imagination of the 19th century saw in the plaster casts a poignant beauty. Edward Bulwer-Lytton's novel The Last Days of Pompeii, published in 1834, painted a vivid drama that captured the Victorian public, shaping popular perceptions of the tragedy. Artists like Giovanni Battista Piranesi and the neoclassical painters visited the ruins, sketching the skeletons and casts to capture a sublime terror. The 20th century sought to reconstruct the city in novels, paintings, and movies, and the cultural repercussions rippled through the neoclassical movement, shaping architecture and art across Europe. Politically, the rediscovery fueled the Grand Tour, cementing Italy as a destination for cultural pilgrimage, and the repatriation of artifacts became a point of national pride. But the real Pompeii is more extraordinary than any fiction. It is a place that simultaneously embodies the heights of human creativity and the depths of human suffering. Walking through its streets today, you can hear the echo of ancient footsteps, the laughter of children, the clamor of the marketplace. And above it all, the looming silhouette of Vesuvius, the killer and the preserver, stands as a perpetual reminder of the thin line between civilization and chaos. So, after watching the full story, what do you think was the most terrifying moment of Pompeii's last day, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reasoning. If this documentary brought the ancient world to life for you, please give it a like. It helps others find these stories. And if you know someone fascinated by history, share it with them. Share it with them. To continue exploring the lost civilizations and the secrets they hold, hit subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Next time, we're uncovering the chilling mystery of the Mayan collapse, a civilization that vanished under a code of premonitions. Don't miss that. For now, check out our playlist of ancient catastrophes linked on screen. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is never really dead.